The approval rate for EB-5 was, drum roll here, 97%. Yulia Novik, true or false?
The requirements are higher.
Yeah.
They demand more documents, more proof, so how can it be? Not everybody can obtain the proof that they required before.
So now you see these regional centers that they're lending, giving unsecured loans to their investors. Investors don't have to prove where that money came from. And it makes the process a lot easier.
Clean doesn't mean easy to
Clean
put
doesn't mean
together,
easy.
unfortunately.
Clean
in
doesn't
our
mean
case.
EB-5 clean. There's different
Yes.
types of clean, right?
And it's not so much self-serving because we're not asking you to sign an agreement. We don't have to pay for that contract.
Although we might ask you at some point. Good afternoon. My name is Charles Raether. I'm the managing partner at AmLaw Group. And today we have a very honored guest with us, my colleague and senior associate, Yulia Novik.
Good afternoon, Charles.
Hi, thanks for being here. Yulia heads up our EB-5 practice group. And that's very appropriate since today we're going to focus on the EB-5 program, latest trends, latest news, and share with you some of our insights as to what makes EB-5 maybe even a more enticing, a more interesting option than it has been in the past. For those of you who have followed the EB-5 program, you probably know that it's had a bit of a checkered past. The program was actually suspended for a while, or at least the regional center program a couple years ago. Unfortunately, it seems like the EB-5 program is a bit like the ugly stepchild in Washington. Republicans are anti-immigration in general, it seems like, and Democrats don't like EB-5 because they feel like it's selling green cards for money. So I don't know. I think that's a distorted view of things. And in fact, I think the EB-5 program is bringing a lot of benefit to the U.S. economy, certainly a lot of money. And so today we wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls, some of the issues to watch out for when you're preparing a petition for an EB-5 application. But even better yet, I wanted to share some positive news that we've heard over the last couple months. And in particular, just to summarize, talking about the new approval rates for EB-5, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. The other issue is in terms of the processing times. And again, here too, we see some very promising news that should interest potential investors. And the third point we wanted to talk about is some alternative financing options that are available for investors to allow them to make the EB-5 program actually more accessible. So we're going to talk all about that and more. So to begin with, Yulia, maybe we'll talk about some statistics, which I don't want to speak for you, but I think you really didn't even believe them when I told them to her. So
I still don't believe it.
She
I
still
see
doesn't
it in
believe it.
front of me, but I have too many questions. How is it possible?
So I guess that's a sign of being a good attorney, right? You don't believe, you got to double check everything. So what the statistics we're talking about is the fact that there was a FOIA request, and FOIA is Freedom of Information Act, when the government doesn't want to give you information, but you were able to kind of force it out of them. And a couple market players or players in the space did a FOIA, and they were able to get statistics going back from roughly April 2022 until January 2025. And based on those statistics, believe it or not, the approval rate for EB-5 was, drum roll here, 97%. Yulia Novik, true or false?
According to the pages, it's true. According to me, I still can't believe it. How is it possible?
Well, see, Yulia's battled, she's battle scarred. She's been through EB-5 for 8+ years or so. And so for her to hear that the average, approval rate is 97%, only 3% denials it is pretty hard to believe.
The requirements are higher.
Yeah.
They demand more documents, more proof. So how can it be? Not everybody can obtain the proof that they required before. So,
right. Well, maybe are the officers getting lazier? I don't know. I doubt that. I'm just kidding about that. But yes, the news is, yes, only 3% denial rates on average. Chinese investors, I think it was a little under 3. I think for Indian investors, it was closer to 1%. And then rest of the world was maybe 5% or so. And so a blended average comes out to about 3%. So incredibly good news, especially from the perspective of the likelihood of you getting approved. So, we've been doing this over 15 years. And our approval rate was always at least 97% or probably higher. So, given our experience in doing this, so if you're looking at EB-5 and you're looking for a safe route, I think this has shown that EB-5 is in fact a safe route. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody that comes to us, we can say, hey, you've got a great petition, you've got a great chance of getting approval. There's a lot of space between, coming into us and doing an initial consultation and actually getting the petition prepared and preparing the source of funds paperwork that's necessary to get the approval. And I think Yulia knows it can be a very difficult task.
I think with every new client, I'm as skeptical about his or her petition as I'm skeptical about the statistics.
Exactly.
Because usually everybody believes that their money are very clean,
yes.
that it's very easy.
And in many cases, their money is clean by common sense measures. But when you're dealing with EB-5, there's a lot of stuff in the EB-5 world that is not common sense.
Clean doesn't mean easy to put together, unfortunately.
Clean doesn't mean EB-5 clean. There's different types of clean, right?
No, the money can be absolutely clean. It's just there is no way to obtain documents that immigration authorities are asking us for.
Right. And I think Yulia, for example, a lot of our clients from Canada, you'd think, okay, Canada, US, very similar political, economic systems, banking systems, Canadians probably got to be the easiest clients out there. And I'm sure Yulia would not agree with that based on a recent experience, that Canadians, especially some of the Canadian clients we've had lately, they were a challenge, weren't they?
And basically mostly because Canadians with sufficient funds, they're very advanced. They don't just have one company, distribute dividends, keep on one account.
Right. They use trust, a lot of trust structures.
A lot of trust.
I think it actually gets back to the fact that taxes are certainly higher in Canada. And so there's more elaborate tax minimization schemes using trusts and multiple
corporations, shareholders, shares, types of shares keep changing. And if we see the final document of the corporation saying that we had so many shares of this type, but the first one saying no, we have so many of another type, we have to obtain everything from the beginning, so it doesn't confuse.
So that's something I never thought about, but I think that's probably true, because I would say the corporate structures with our Canadian clients tend to be a little bit more complicated, and that's probably due to, I don't want to say tax evasion, but tax minimization, optimization strategies, and unknowingly, or,
it's very advanced. The petitions are very advanced, but very complicated. They work with attorneys, with accountants, so.
Right. But nonetheless, having said that, I don't think we ever had a denial for a Canadian EB-5 client, and hopefully that'll never change. So we're still, despite the complications, able to work with our Canadian clients, certainly our Indian clients as well, of which we have a lot of. With Indian clients, in terms of source of funds, a lot of Indians are here on H-1Bs or similar work visas. And I'm not saying if your source of funds are coming from India as opposed to the US, it's necessarily easier, but they tend to be a little bit easier just because people have been in the US here for a more limited period of time. They haven't been here since kids, so maybe they've been here 3 years, 6 years. They don't have such a long track record in paper trail that they've got to follow and reassemble. So I would say, clients, whether they're Indian, doesn't matter, Canadians, Brits, if they're working here in the US, you agree, Yulia, that it's probably a little easier to collect their source of funds paperwork?
And I even recommended recently one client to keep collecting whatever salary he is getting here, just to put on a separate account, and whatever savings he had from before, use for living expenses.
Right. Yep. So you can be a little bit more flexible and create the needed structures. Say if you're here, especially if you're on an employment visa, employment is probably the easiest source of funds to use. And so if you're generating employment income, you don't own the company. Generally, that's a pretty straightforward, easy way to show your source of funds. And if you come to us early enough in the process, like Yulia said, with advice she gave to the one client, just start using your salary, put that in a separate account, start accumulating that. Other funds that you have savings or, from stocks or other investments, use that to spend down. We don't have to prove those sources, and we'll just show your salary as a source for the $800,000. So anyway, we kind of digressed a little bit. Getting back to the three main topics I wanted to talk about today. The first one was, again, the 3% denial rate for EB-5. That's incredible. And hopefully that'll stay the same going forward. The other information that came out with this FOIA request, which I thought was kind of interesting, was the processing times. So as we all know, processing times have been a real headache for EB-5 investors. And I'm sure you can recall when the big rush was in 2019, when they were raising it from 500, and we had a big influx. I mean, we still have some clients, I think, that are getting adjudicated, right? Or has everybody gone through?
One client after out of few dozens is still not adjudicated.
Right.
Others few we answered to requests, and we're still waiting USCIS.
So I don't want to scare anybody, but yeah, a lot of people that filed back in 2019, only in 2024, early 2025, they were getting approvals. So this was scaring off a lot of investors, and rightly so. I mean, gosh, who wants to wait 5-6 years to get an approval? But since the new law was passed, the statistics, again, that were received from this FOIA request are showing a different story, and it's actually a positive story, at least if you're willing to invest in a rural project. And the statistics showed that that first year after the new law came out, there were still more urban projects than rural, because historically nobody invested in rural projects. There just weren't that many, right?
They were more risky.
Yeah, they were considered more risky. I don't think if they necessarily were.
Yeah.
But under the new law, rural projects are by law to be expedited, and USCIS is holding true to that they are in fact expediting. So you can see in the last 2 years, like from January 2025 to January 2023, I think it was a ratio of 13-1, they said in the statistics. Like for every urban project for every urban application, there were 13 rural applications. So you can see this huge number of investors going into rural projects. And we know what's driving that. I mean, it's the expedited processing. Nobody's all of a sudden just deciding to invest in rural projects because they like them. They like them because they're getting approved faster. And we can see that those expectations are justified. The statistics in that FOIA request showed that more or less the US government was sticking to that 12-month adjudication timeframe, right, for rural projects. Whereas for urban projects, because there's no expedited, there's no priority processing for them, those urban projects are taking 2 years, even 3 years or longer. So
it's still not too bad comparing to 2019 petitions.
Well, that's a very optimistic way of looking at it.
I still think it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, compared to how it was. So it's not so bad. But if, a lot of our clients are not in a hurry necessarily. They don't need to get it approved in 1 year. A lot do. And so they go that route. But even if you feel like, hey, I've got 2 years or maybe 3 years, the issue is, it seems to us that USCIS is adjudicating those urban projects on an as-is availability basis. So if they have the manpower available, they'll put some people on these urban projects. If they don't, everybody's going on to the rural projects, and they only get to the urban projects to the extent they have capacity or people available. And we don't know, but that process could even worsen going forward, that they're going to be spending all their resources on rural projects, that fewer and fewer officers will be allocated to the urban projects, and we might even see longer processing for the urban ones. I don't know. We'll see, but I think that's a possibility.
Still, Charles, as you mentioned that some clients are not in a rush, maybe it's not a time to give advice, but I can forget later. Those clients who are not rushing, who are thinking about EB-5, they're ready to invest right now, but they don't need to come to live in the United States within a year or two. Maybe they're finalizing something. Mm-hmm. For some, it may be a good idea to file right now with an urban project to freeze their children's age.
Yeah,
this is a big consideration.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Freeze the children's age. And here's the other thing, too. We know this, too, with the new law. We didn't mention it earlier. You can file for adjustment of status when you file for your EB-5 petition. So whether you're waiting 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, if you're here in the U.S., you can adjust your status, get a temporary employment authorization, travel in and out of the U.S., so you basically get all the rights of a green card holder without having the green card. So even if you have to wait 3 years for the urban project approval, you still could live here and work here. Again, assuming your children aren't going to age out and these other factors. So it's not as painful, I would say, as it was in the past when you had to wait and not have the opportunity for adjustment.
2022 changes, were pretty good.
Pretty positive. And so this FOIA information proves that these changes are being implemented for the better. So another reason why, if you're thinking about immigration to the U.S., EB-5 is maybe worth looking at. Now here, the third bit of news, it's not related to the FOIA information, but this is just an observation, is alternative financing for participating in the EB-5. So what does that mean? What is this financing about, right? You got to invest $800,000. How can you finance? Well, there's been structures in place, and we've done it for a long time with our clients. You could borrow money for EB-5. So for a long time, we would have clients, they could borrow it from their own business back in their home country. They might borrow funds from a friend of theirs or a relative, or they could get a gift from a relative. So this concept of borrowing money has been around a long time, and it's a very safe method of getting the needed funds for the EB-5. But what I'm talking about is using regional center money to participate. And you might be being like, what? What do you mean regional center money? There's at least 2 regional centers we're aware of. There might be more, and I think there's going to be more on the market in the near future where they are providing financing, because I got to tell you, some of these regional centers are really loaded, that they've got enough assets so they can provide financing to their investors to stimulate new growth, bring into the program new investors who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate because they just didn't have the 800,000. Or maybe they had the 800, but they couldn't prove, the source of funds.
But there is still a percentage, some ratio, right? Still investor has to put
a certain amount in. Yeah, absolutely. The regional centers that we know of, they're financing roughly up to 250, 300,000, I think. So the investor still has to put in about, $500,000 of their own money. And that's a good question. I don't know if we're going to see that change in the future. They might feel more comfortable financing, 400,000 in the future or even more. And if they do, I think that's going to open the gates to more applicants. And I see nothing wrong with that. It's going to allow more and more people to participate in the program. But here's what the advantage is. The advantage is not simply that you're borrowing the money. And by the way, the terms are pretty interesting. Most of the regional centers we know about, they're charging about 5 or 6% per annum interest. The loan is usually for somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And at least one regional center, I think they charge an origination fee of a couple percentage. The other one does not. So you're not paying any kind of origination. You're just paying like a bank loan, 6%. So it's not that bad at all. But what's the advantage? It's not so much getting the cash if you don't have it. I mean, there's a benefit to that. But the bigger advantage for a lot of our clients is, like you mentioned, they don't have to prove the source of funds. Because when you borrow money from your friend or you borrow it from your uncle, your friend or your uncle have to prove where they got the money from, right? They're going to have to show how they earned that money. And they might not be able to do so. Your uncle's a great guy, but he doesn't want to give his tax returns and show where he got all his millions of dollars, and he hid it from, his sister, his brother, and his nephews.
Even with legal entity, if you're borrowing funds from a legal entity that is not bank or financial institution, you still have to show lawful business activity and which funds that company used to start operations.
Right. And so the loophole, I call it a loophole, has always been like you just said, if it was a financial organization, the government's not going to force you to prove where the bank got the money. I mean, they're in the business of giving loans. So, okay, this makes sense. So I think people started getting creative and started thinking, okay, what else besides a bank could loan money to investors? And lo and behold, hey, you've got regional centers. They're in the business of borrowing and lending money. They're not banks, but they're financial institutions. At least USCIS has bought that argument. And so now you see these regional centers that they're lending, giving unsecured loans to their investors. Investors don't have to prove where that money came from. And it makes the process a lot easier. You're creating more options for new investors who might say, hey, they might have only 500,000 at this point. They can borrow the 300 and they don't have to prove, where that 300 came from. So I don't know about you, but I think it's going to lead to a lot more interest in EB-5 and more participants.
And I think especially with rural projects, because the approval, we should expect it within 1 year. They give them loan for 2, 3, 4 years. I don't know exactly, it depends, but it's longer. So basically, by the time USCIS is looking at your petition, you don't have to repay those funds back. So you don't have to prove the source of funds that you use to repay
back. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point too. Because as Yulia was mentioning, if you have a loan where you've got to pay back the funds, CIS might say, hey, show us what's the source that you're going to use to pay the interest and pay back the loan. But if you're in a rural project, you get that approved in a year. You don't have to pay back the loan for 2, 3, 4 years after that. You'll have your green card well before you have to start paying down that loan. So very interesting news on that front. And I think it's something we've got to do a better job in the legal industry, sharing this with clients, because I think this really is a bit of a game changer as well. Now, another question I wanted to discuss is, clients always look at EB-5, but they might say, what other options do we have?
Have we discussed Gold Card?
Oh, Gold Card. Well, we can. That is another option. That is an option. I don't know how
Which is
realistic it is.
supposed to be there, but it's not really there yet. But
yeah, right. It's kind of a
talking.
phantom gold card. President Trump has kind of been playing games with everybody. So, as you may or may not know, President Trump back in March made this big announcement that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple of weeks a new program to replace the corrupt, rundown, garbage EB-5 program. And then I think he ran into reality and realized this is not going to be so quick to roll out this new gold card where you invest $5 million. First of all, the biggest question is, why would somebody want to invest $5 million as opposed to $800,000? Maybe to get a nice fancy little card that has Trump's portrait on it. I'm sure if they ever do issue this gold card, it's going to have a portrait of Trump on there. I don't think his ego would allow anything else. So we'll see about that. So yeah, you just mentioned this as an option, the gold card. Possible. I think any lawyer who's been working in this space realizes there's a lot of legal problems with launching this gold card program, especially if they want to replace the EB-5 with it. It's just not going to happen. I mean, they might launch it in parallel to the EB-5, but I don't think they're going to cancel EB-5.
Taxes, Charles, taxes.
Well,
that we promise that you're not going to pay from sources abroad, which is also...
And you believe politicians? They promise you no taxes?
Again... I'm very skeptical because IRS is here who is collecting taxes, and it's a code, it's a law, so the president cannot just overrule it.
Right, and the code is, if you're a U.S. citizen or long-term resident, permanent resident, you have to pay taxes on your worldwide income. If a gold card holder is suddenly exempt from paying worldwide income tax, you're going to create two classes of citizens. I mean, I don't think many politicians in Washington would be able to accept that. Besides the one sitting in the White House, but I don't think he's thought this through too much.
But even if it was possible and we were creating two classes of citizens, wouldn't it need to be codified?
Well, it would be, yeah. And that requires changing the laws. Yeah. And the way things are going in Washington, it's pretty hard to do anything, much less get new laws passed. So yes, that is one option alternative to EB-5. Still, I think that option kind of went the way of Elon Musk. With Elon's departure from Washington, I think this gold card might also go with him. But we'll see. Right. Yeah. That's the challenge, right? And we've worked with a number of regional centers. I mean, the industry is becoming more regulated and more, I would say, safer. It's not like it was back in, 2012 when we had our first EB-5 project. It was a bit like the Wild West back then. So they're getting rid of the driftwood. They're getting rid of the shifty kind of regional center operators, and the ones that are left are the most reliable, I think, the safest. So nothing's guaranteed with the EB-5 investments. And even one regional center that we've worked with for over 10 years, one of their projects actually recently went bankrupt. And I think we were all shocked by it, but they all disclose to you the money's under risk.
The money is under risk, and we even have a project that is not bankrupt, that is very successful, but still they cannot return money, although contractually they're supposed to, because they're not liquid.
Right. So there are challenges, and certainly there's regional centers that we can recommend to our clients, and they always have to make the decision, the choice that's best for them. But there's no guarantees in life. Overall, I would say, based on our 15 plus years of experience, your chances are still better with a regional center project than your own business. I think Yulia and I have seen a lot of people invest in their own business, whether it's an EB-5 or maybe an L1, EB-1C. When you do your own business in the U.S., at least in this context, statistically speaking, it's a riskier proposition than a regional center project.
It's culturally different for many people who are coming here, and people don't expect that the business is different here. Yeah. You have to be used to do business
here. Yes, right. So if you've lived here maybe a while, you have a U.S. business partner, doing your own business might make sense, might be a little bit easier. So with that in closing, I don't know if there's any other closing thoughts that maybe we've missed here. I think we talked about the latest news, the new approval rates, which are just excellent, alternative financing options, and then also the processing times, which at least for rural projects are very good.
Money. We're missing money, my favorite question.
Oh, really? Money? What part of money? What?
My favorite advice that if you're planning to do EB-5, don't try put aside money before you talk to attorneys, because we tell you how to structure it properly. Because if you mix money with some other funds that you had or your spouse's funds, it may be a problem.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I know this sounds self-serving, go talk to an attorney, but I guess the point of Yulia's comment is that best to speak to an experienced attorney before you start the whole process, just to make sure you're collecting the money correctly, you're doing everything that's necessary so that we don't have headaches later, especially this issue of commingled funds, as Yulia mentioned. If you've got $1 million and you put your 800,000 for the EB-5, but you have another 200,000 from some other sources, they're going to make you prove where the whole million came from, even though you only have to prove 800. Once they see everything mingled together, they're going to say money's fungible. It's all mixed together in the same, bucket. That's where problems can arise.
And it's not so much self-serving because we're not asking you to sign agreement. We don't have to pay for that contract.
Although we might ask you at some point.
At some point when we're filing it. But really, if you're interested in this program, just come to us, talk for an hour. We will explain you what to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. So yeah, it's in everybody's interest to make sure we're on the same page at the commencement, at the start, to make sure you're clear what's required, that we have an understanding of your situation in your case, so that there's no unexpected problems going forward, because it just makes things difficult for everybody.
We just had to wait too many times already with clients whose sources we checked and we couldn't collect all the evidence because all the money were commingled in their bank accounts. And then we waited a year, 2 years, even more when clients put aside separate funds.
Yeah, so that's also a possibility too, that if it's too difficult to show what they've got, but they say, hey, in 2 years, I can earn this 800,000 again. We've got some patient clients that are willing to do that. Or as we just discussed, they might only accumulate 500K, finance the rest from the regional center. So there's always options, which is always good. And as you'll see in the regional center space, in the EB-5 space, there are more and more options coming up there in terms of projects, project types, whether it's urban, rural, debt, equity, high interest paying, low interest paying, shorter return of funds. We're seeing funds returning money back in as little as 3.5 years. Other ones might keep it longer, but they're paying a higher interest rate. So there's options out there.
This is actually the great portion that we haven't mentioned about the change in the laws, that technically, if you created sufficient workspaces, you can get your investment back within the first 2 years of investment, comparing to before, when you had to keep your money for 2 years when you had your conditional green card.
Correct, yeah.
But of course, if you're planning to do that, you have to look at the contract you sign in with the regional center, because it will control how many years you're supposed to keep the money.
Yeah, that's a good point too. That now USCIS has said that you only have to keep it invested for 2 years, not until when you file for the permanent green card. So if things move along quickly, you could get your money out before you even file for the permanent green card. So yet another reason to consider the EB-5 program for yourself or your family. Again, thank you again for your time. Yulia, thanks for being with us today and talking about all these issues. And feel free to reach out to us in the future for any questions related to EB-5 or any other aspects of business immigration to the U.S.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.